Hello and welcome to the Refurb and Retrofit podcast. We've got a fantastic guest today, Kat Hoad from Interior Design Declares, an organisation which is taking a very active role in sustainable interior design. Kat, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Kat, we met at a show about 9 months ago it was, and I saw you on your stand when you were working as a representative of Interior Design Declares, but that wasn't the only job you had. So tell me a little bit about your background in interior design and what you were doing before you joined that organisation.
I am part of Interior Design Declares. My firm was one of the founding members, and I currently chair the steering committee. And my firm is called Absolute Project Management, which I've actually just sold recently, but it's still going very strong. I founded it about 17 years ago to provide project management and interior design to people who were renovating their own homes, essentially because there wasn't really somebody that I couldn't find somebody doing that. So I decided to do it myself and then thought other people might be interested, as it proved they were.
You've been running an interior design and management consultancy that manages the projects for people. Over the time that you were working there, what sort of experience did you have about design choices that people were making, and how did that sort of impact your idea of how sustainable their choices were?
Well, over the time that I have been working in the industry, that's changed enormously, because when I started, even though I was quite interested in, and always had been in sustainability and green sort of stuff, there was hardly anything available, and there wasn't very much talk in the industry or in the construction industry more widely about doing things in a sustainable way. And I think that's partly because there wasn't much demand, and there weren't therefore many products, and it's a bit circular. And of course, as the issue of climate change, and as we'll talk about, lots of other things to do with treating the planet and its occupants nicely, has become more talked about, increasingly more talked about in the last 5 years, like exponentially. So when I started, it was kind of like, if you wanted to have a sustainable fabric, you would essentially be like Hessian or undyed cotton or something, which have their places, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. And there weren't that many choices. And I think that it was very much perceived as a sort of a kind of good for you rather than nice to have around you. But then that's changed enormously. And it's changed in terms of materials, but also certainly from the point of view that we come from, the larger renovation, what you do to your house, how you do it, the energy that you use in your house once it's been done up, where you buy your products from, how you think about waste, how you think about the scope of the project, all those things. We've now been considering in loads of detail for ages.
So I've got distinct interest in the aspects of interior design and retrofit, because I've been getting very frustrated trying to help both friends and also working on one of my own projects to try and understand what I could be using within a home to enhance the sustainable credentials and essentially make my home more comfortable and my friends' homes more comfortable, whilst also making them more healthy and energy efficient. And one of the problems that I found during the course of the process, helping others and trying to do this myself, is that it's actually incredibly difficult to find out what is, a certifiable, sustainable material, whether it be fabric, whether it be copper and brassware for your doors, or whether it's just the light bulbs. And I wondered, in terms of interior, the design of it, so what aspects do you consider when you're looking at a building, particularly in retrofits? For the audience that are listening to this, what should they be thinking of when they think about the interior and the design of a building?
I think essentially the slightly boring answer is that they should be thinking about everything in a lot of detail. And I'll give you my summary of how we'd approach that sort of project to give you an idea. And then I can talk, if you wanted to, about specifics for the next 3 weeks without stopping properly. And so, firstly, I think to do any project, any renovation project, full stop, but definitely sustainable one, plan ahead, allow as much time as you can, and probably more to do planning of all the different stages. So exactly what you're doing, the order you're doing it in, what the budgets are going to be, who the service providers are going to be, what the materials you're using are going to be. And then all of those things will have lots of interconnected routes and cross references and so on, which will take time to think through. But if you think it through, you can save lots of money and avoid lots of mistakes and get find much better products and get a result that you're going to be much happier with in the end. And my kind of steps to go through once you're actually, well, thinking through each stage are energy. Where's the energy that you're using in your house to heat it and to power the various devices? Where's it coming from? And could it come from renewable sources? Ideally, could it come from renewable sources that you generate yourself? So like solar panels, well, PVs, but essentially solar panels harnessing solar power, and air source heat pumps. There are other sorts of heat pump, but realistically, most built-up areas, air source heat pumps are what you're going to have to need, what you need to use because of space and stuff to generate energy. And or if you can't do that for lots of different reasons, then look for suppliers who provide a good percentage, if not all, of their energy from renewable sources. And then, as you refer to using, when you're actually using your house, you want it to, the energy you put in is really, really important that it's used well. So it's super important to insulate your property properly so that you, the energy that you're probably buying and then pumping around your house in whatever method to heat it stays inside as much as possible, and it doesn't just like go outside. It doesn't go through gaps in windows and thin roofs and that kind of stuff. There's similar considerations apply to cooling as well, which increasingly we're having to think about. But obviously, talking on a day like today, we're thinking more about heating. So I think thinking about that is really important. And as a designer, you can, especially if you're at the stage that we get involved in, you can be saying to people, okay, so how are you heating? How's the infrastructure of your house? So you need to rip out all your radiators and put new ones in. Okay, well, how are you going to power the heat that's going through those? So is it you're going to get a gas boiler? Supposedly gas boilers are obsolete by 2030. I mean, who knows whether that's actually realistic, and what do you do in the meantime? Hydrogen's talked about, but that's not also really a runner. One of the first questions you can ask yourself is, why are you doing what you're doing, and do you need to actually do it? For example, lots of people, when they have a home, want to get more space in, or think they need more rooms, more space, and think about building an extension. But realistically, an extension is expensive because the materials are expensive, the labour cost to build is expensive, and also very often, especially if you're in a built-up area, you will have to employ specialists who will not be cheap to pay for, because they're super qualified professional people. So you might need planning permission, for which you'll probably need an architect. You might need structural engineering advice. You might need party wall surveyors. You will probably need building control, and then there are various other sort of specialists that you will have to employ and pay for, which are generally sort of thousands of pounds each, as well as the cost of the build. So alternatively, you could think, well, a good architect or designer will help you look at your space and say, actually, do you actually need more space, or can we reconfigure the space that you have better? And most good designers, architects, will be able to find space that you haven't even thought about that can be used in a different way, or rooms can be reconfigured. And if you're not spending £100 minimum on your extension, you've got a lot of money in the bank to make chops and changes inside. So you can save money that way by by not necessarily going with the first thing you think of, the standard sort of approach to renovating. And then you can also look at what you've got at the moment. So you want a new kitchen, and I can tell an example about my house, which I'm not particularly proud of, but ages ago, before I really got into all this stuff, I wanted a new kitchen, or my husband wanted a wooden kitchen. We had a nice kitchen, but it was quite old-fashioned. It was wooden. So we ordered a new kitchen, blah, blah, blah. Luckily, I decided to give away the old kitchen because I didn't want it just to go into landfill. So I put it on FreeCycle, which is an amazing site, both as a user and a donor. And the bloke who came and took the dismantled kitchen sent me photos a few months later of my kitchen installed in his sister's house, completely reconfigured. I mean, the same units, but like in a different way, painted differently and with a different work surface. And it looked really cool, possibly better than my new kitchen that I paid lots of money for. So that was very sort of thought-provoking. Like, could you use, so you can almost certainly use the cabinets in your existing kitchen differently. You may be able to use work surfaces again, or use them somewhere else, like as a tabletop. You can think about the light fittings that you're taking down in my kitchen renovation scenario, and think about whether you can use them elsewhere in the house.
Yeah, I must admit, I've got plenty of examples of friends that have adopted. I think it's a German principle of reuse, refurbish, and I can't remember what the third R is, but it's something about redesign. And they have adopted a sort of very adaptable approach to getting their house retrofit when they've made energy upgrades. There is an integral part of retrofit, which is where design sort of smashes into it, that some of the retrofit upgrades that people have to their houses force adaptations to space, and they force adaptations to the environment that people are living in. And you can look at examples like the Walthamstow, the Waltham Forest retrofit that was done by one of the councils. Mostly people in that environment had their external walls moved, but they also had to have cylinders and other units put into their houses. So people, by the nature of some aspects of retrofit, do have to sort of think about the reuse or the redesign of space inside. But I want to move away from the idea of space and think about the materials that are used, because there's an important aspect, isn't there, about when somebody's retrofitting their house where they'll be making it healthier and easier to heat, possibly have better ventilation. You can tell me a little bit about air quality and materials, but the products that are going into their home can have as much impact as the products that are already there. So maybe give us an insight into considerations that people might want to have about if they are replacing materials or if they are refurbishing items in their home. What sort of impacts can they have through the choices they make?
You can have a huge impact both on your family's immediate environment by what you choose, but also on the planet more widely, because everything that you buy is going to have been made somewhere of something. So I'm very keen on the message about materials of any sort, anything you're using or any of your suppliers are using. So ideally have a conversation with your contractors as well, and use materials that are either renewable or recycled.
And what can you give us an example of what that might be? Because I mean, like worktops, I mean, is that considered renewable? Is what specifically? Give us some examples.
Yeah, almost every natural material is going to be renewable. So things that grow, so timber and cotton and linen, and certain oils and that sort of stuff that you can use for materials. There's also loads and loads and loads, as we all know, of plastic already knocking around the world, and you can use recycled plastics for lots of different applications. Not all at the moment, but definitely lots. So I would strongly suggest trying to use as many products made from materials that are renewable, i.e. natural resources, or are recycled. The point that we can mix in with other parts of the conversation and how you check whether something is genuinely green, because there's lots of not exactly sleight of hand, but obfuscation and being economical with the truth. For example, you might find a product that says contains recycled materials. So you think that's great, and it probably is better than something that uses no recycled materials. But for example, some tiles will say contains or recycled content, and you look at the detail and there's like 20% up to 20% recycled content, and that's better. As I say, that's better than not, but that's arguably, I would say, that's misleading, and I think it's unfortunately still down to consumers or professionals in the industry to really check.
Yeah, I mean, I found that very interesting what you're saying, because I've struggled recently with just replacing bulbs.
Yeah.
Where if I search on Amazon or other mechanisms for purchasing bulbs, and if you go and look on them, some of them actually have the label in the title eco bulbs or sustainable bulbs. But then now that I'm spending so much time around retrofit professionals, I'm constantly being reminded to go and check the labeling and actually see what the energy efficiency is. And then I find out that not only are they not economical, their efficiency rating is not A double plus or A triple plus, I think is the highest. They're in fact like D or G, and they look great. So I just bought some really great secondhand lighting cages for the house that I'm moving into. And they look rustic because, if I'm honest, the house that I'm buying is pretty rustic at the moment. I hope to be slightly less rustic.
Yeah.
But the bulbs I was going to put in there are those lovely filament bulbs, which is not great for a non-visual medium for the people that listen to this, but they're the bulbs that look like industrial ones.
Yeah.
And almost every single one I found, bar a couple of brands, were really, really inefficient. So they look great, but they were going to cost me an absolute fortune. So if there is a problem with labeling, I mean, how deep consumers, when we're buying stuff, we kind of want things to be quick and easy. So is the responsibility on us, or is it the people that are selling us? I mean, how far can we sort of research this? Because it is pretty tough finding this stuff.
From my point of view, there is a responsibility on all of us from individuals. And unfortunately, until things change a lot at a government or intergovernment level, we have to do more ourselves, and we have to. I think we have to think more about consuming everything, which is a wider conversation and slightly more hippie-ish way of looking at things. But I think it's important and helps you get into the mindset of this whole journey. We have to. I think as consumers, we can ask questions and vote with our credit cards. And not buy stuff that doesn't look good. As designers and professional suppliers and so on, we can do the same, ask questions of our suppliers and manufacturers, and then ask more questions and get them to justify responses and not be put off by kind of obfuscation or, yes, this is terribly eco or whatever. And then one of the other things I'm really keen on in the sustainability journey world is people, all the different industries and companies and action groups working together. So I'd really encourage you as a consumer or as an individual, as somebody working in the profession, to join a relevant organization so you can ask the questions in your own right, but you can also be part of an organization which is itself asking questions. And lots of the businesses like organizations like Interior Design Declares are asking similar ish questions and are talking to each other. So if all those voices come together, government and intergovernment agencies and so on start to listen.
We've got a bit of a problem when it comes to reuse, which I wanted to discuss with you, and that is that some of the opportunities that consumers have when they're refitting and retrofitting their homes, getting grand, super lovely new heating systems and energy sources from solar or other places, they look at maybe doing a bit of a refit with some of their existing furniture, maybe replacing it if they had to adjust room sizes. But if you get second-hand goods, a lot of these goods that you're getting potentially don't adhere to the same regulations that new furniture, for instance, or new electrical products have. So how do people that want to have a sustainable approach to the design of their house sort of take advantage of the availability of second-hand goods, but also make sure that what they're buying is still going to be okay for them? And really, what should they be looking at? I mean, how do you tell if a sofa is going to give you cancer? I mean, or is going to produce some horrible off-gassing? But I mean, I know that you're pretty well versed in this. What sort of things should we look out for? What should we be aware of?
I think it's very difficult to give a definitive answer about that because you don't know where the secondhand sofa's been or what's happened to it. But I guess you have to use common sense and, again, do a bit of research, ask questions, literally pick up the cushions and bang them around, and accept that there are far fewer guarantees and far less. It's far less likely that they comply with current levels of regulation. Having said that, one of the campaigns that Interior Design Declares is supporting really strongly is about the use of toxic chemicals in the fire retardancy that are the fire retardancy processes that are applied to soft furnishings. So, which includes cushions and sofas, but also beds and mattresses, that kind of thing. Because at the moment you have to, the UK is fairly unique around the world in requiring these particular chemicals to be used to pass a specific fire retardancy test, which is different to the one used in the EU and even in the one used in the US. And I'm very much not an expert on that, but if you are interested in that, interior design declares.co.uk resources page has loads and loads of information about that. And there's lots of research being done and lots of lobbying to Parliament, which kind of answers your question with another question, and not particularly helpful one, but basically the argument currently is that even if you buy a new sofa, unless you buy a very expensive one that's made completely out of naturally fire retardant materials, which you can get, but it's like loads more expensive than standard Habitat or whatever, it will necessarily have been treated with chemicals that are
not necessarily very
toxic.
good for you. Well, that's slightly disturbing. That
it's super disturbing.
Newer furniture is also going to be as potentially unhealthy as older furniture.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm a great fan of ripping stuff apart, usually with a face mask on and some breathing apparatus if I have to.
Very much so. And goggles.
And replacing it with some natural products. There is a sense of us going full circle when it comes to the idea of sustainable interior design and design practice, because if I think back to my parents, who are phenomenal hoarders, and I'm currently residing in their house now and in betweeny stage of buying my next house, and my dad has an excellent supply of practically every tool that I could ever want. And fixtures and fitting,
every thickness of
every screw, it's fantastic. And then at some point in the last 40 years, we got into a highly consumptive pattern of wanting new and kind of demanding it in a way. It's the fancy, the newest thing that part of that cycle that we've got into is because of people who are taste makers and change makers. So the question I'm sort of leading into now is that, who are the people now who are influencing changing mindsets about the reuse and recycling and more sustainable practices required for interior design? Because until we have people making these sort of choices fashionable or even desirable, then it's quite difficult to influence the general population. Because if people don't like the idea of having reused goods in their homes, then they won't do it because they'll vote with their feet. So, I mean, in your mind, who are the people that are making the most waves and having the most impact about helping change people's minds?
Recently, in particular, there have been far more sort of newspaper articles and stuff on social media and telly and so on about the reusing, basically not buying new. I guess that the lots of influencers and other sorts of advertisers are very much all about the flashy and the new. And for us as consumers, it's a very easy dopamine hit by a new table lamp or a new rug or whatever, and less easy and certainly less immediate to think, okay, well, I've got a perfectly nice cupboard, but it's a bit boring. I could paint it a different colour, or I could put the doors on differently, or change the handles, or whatever. But that is, I think you're right that there's lots of talk about going back to a slightly more mindful grandparent sort of approach, and there's definitely trends that you can follow on all the different sorts of social media if you look for them. And again, you have to be a bit careful to scrape a bit further if it says green or eco or whatever. But there are lots of things out there, and in different sectors of society and fashion, people are more or less into it. In my experience so far, at least the very high end is much less interested. They're interested from a health point of view, but not necessarily from a giving a toss about anybody else's point of view.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very specific. I'm going to move it back to a market which has a very, strong interest in that, is the able to pay market in retrofit. The people that have money to necessarily make changes to the house, or also to the energy infrastructure in the house and the fabric of the house, possibly the people with the most to spend when it comes to interior design choices. However, the people towards the lower margins of that spending bracket, the people that like me, actually, to be honest, who are going to B&M for their accoutrements for their house, for their bits and bobs. I mean, there's a real challenge, when you've only got a few pennies in the bank, looking at whether you're going to get a plastic or a wooden soap dish. It's kind of a no-brainer because it's 2p for a plastic one, and and £1.20 for the wooden one. So, is there more of an opportunity for us to recycle goods? And if there is, where should we be going to for these resources? You mentioned FreeCycle. What sort of places would you recommend for people that want to make sustainable choices, but right now possibly aren't aware of where to go?
That's a very good point, because I mean, lots of people, I'm sure, if they have a plastic soap dish, will just chuck it away because, as you say, it costs nothing, and isn't necessarily the sort of thing you want secondhand anyway. But actually, if it was clean, why not? I think lots of charity shops of all different sorts are taking interiors products more and more, to the extent that they're not soft furnishings or electric. So, they might turn up their nose at a soap dish, but if there's suddenly demand for plastic soap dishes, they're going to start taking them. FreeCycle, I think, is amazing. As I say, both if you're giving stuff away, if you're renovating, and you want to get rid of stuff, you don't want to chuck it in a skip. And also, if you chuck it in a skip, you've got to pay for the skip to be moved. So, whereas if you put it on FreeCycle, the people come to you to collect it, and you don't get any money for it, obviously, but it's taken away free and it's got a second life. And we, doing projects, put practically everything that comes off a project on FreeCycle that we possibly can, like door handles, old, fairly crappy faceplates for switches, light fittings, bits of tap, bits of sink, basically anything that you can think of that isn't like a gritty builder's bit of material, and people come and take it and reuse it.
I'm really buying into the idea of reusing, and I'm kind of lucky because I'm having a lot of interaction with people in the trades that are fitting things like triple glazed windows. It means that I'm getting an insight into places like, and I won't mention any of the brand names, but one of them is a household kitchen fitter that rhymes with Bowden's but doesn't make pies, and other brands like that. And they have a really good policy of just letting people know that there's seconds that have come back after a fit that didn't go well, and you can get them at knockdown prices. I've recently found that you can get internal insulation, which is a design consideration because you're losing a couple of mil on your wall, which you can get for seconds, which doesn't just comes without the guarantee. And there's a couple of sites that do that. The stuff that I'm really fascinated about is how materials can be reused. Now, you talked a little bit about actual physical, like soft furnishings being used. What sort of trends are you noticing in interior design where people are moving towards materials which they kind of don't care whether they're old or new? I mean, I've seen flax being recommended as a material that people can use to renovate and refresh their furnishings, and that's actually sequesters carbon, I think, but it's a little bit expensive. I mean, what sort of choices have you seen your customers make?
Yeah, I mean, there's flax is a good example. So I think it's also fairly easy to grow and not particularly water consumptive, unlike cotton as such, for example. You can use wool. I mean, if you're a vegan, using wool is not such a great option, but wool is amazing as an insulator and for various other purposes. Linseed, for example, if you're oiling stuff, linseed is a seed, so you just buy that, and as long as it's being grown and harvested in a sustainable way, in a careful way, then that would be a good option. Most sorts of timber, again, making sure you've looked at what sort of timber it is, where it comes from, how the forests are managed and so on, and making sure that it's not, well, if you can, asking the question about where the forests are grown, i.e. not clearing virgin rainforest to plant pine forest just because that's a quick buck.
So people are talking about embodied carbon in buildings, and then I was recently making a film for a local tradesman, and he specialises in reconditioning sash windows and does an amazing job. He actually turns old sash windows into double glazed ones, and he does that with a listing building sort of constraints, and he can take out windows and make them double glazed, and they look almost exactly the same. So yeah, shout out to Gregor. I'll put a link into him if you're anywhere in the West Country. He's a lovely guy. But the thing
that
that
sounds
he was,
amazing. I mean, that is almost holy grail in terms of windows.
yeah, he was amazing. But the thing that he highlighted, and he is absolutely dedicated to the wood, is that he loves finding batches of woods that have already been felled or that are available, and then using them, and he can restore windows. So hardwoods that have already been felled or woods that have been used in other products can actually be reused, and he puts them into the timber frames. And I just wondered, there are various controls on ESG in the commercial sector.
Yeah.
What do you feel could be put in place for private residents? Because you'll have to correct me here. I think there's no controls for ESG and carbon that's used in retrofit of interiors. Is there? If you stand me, correct me if I'm
There
wrong.
are no requirements on homeowners themselves to look at our report, the overall carbon or other planet impact of their renovations. Obviously, there are the rules that apply to some of the products individually, but as looking at your entire project, you're not required to do that. It would be, I think it's really, really important that government introduces in a thoughtful and careful way those sorts of rules. The thing is, they're going to make everything more expensive because it's another set of regulation to make sure you are adhering to, which costs money just to get registered, and in how whatever you're making is made. But again, it's coming back to this wider question of looking at value as more than financial value. So
yeah, and we can't just keep consuming this, can we, Kat? I know that you're sort of I mean, you're very active. Obviously, you're in an activist organisation.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've looked at the figures that recently came out for the repair, maintenance, and improvement market, known as the RMI. I think the latest figures for reporting period was that £69 billion was spent by private homeowners on refurbishing and renovating their homes in a 12-month period, and that, I mean, that represents a huge amount of money, and quite a lot of that money isn't being spent on retrofitting. It's improving where retrofit isn't a consideration. But I wonder, I mean, within all of those projects, how much money was spent on, getting a new kitchen done, new fittings in the place? And then I wonder, and you're an expert in this, I mean, how much carbon is expended, unnecessarily, or if we can, to make better choices? Because every time you put new fittings in, it's taken energy to make those fittings, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and that's why the key sort of mantra is plan ahead. Think about what you're doing. Do you really need to do it? Think about what you're using, what all the different supplies you're using are, and what they're made of, where they come from, what how people are treated in the production process and transport process of those things. And as we just went, as you just alluded to, the whole the value thing having to increasingly be more than increasingly looked at as more than just financial value. So looking at effect on planet, obviously carbon, but also lots of other considerations, biodiversity, and how people are treated globally, rather than just thinking, oh, that's nice, that table's 40 quid. That's almost impossible to achieve.
It can't be 40 quid to make that table. Now I'm going to sort of narrow down
to make the table, pay taxes on it, pay people proper wages in a safe working environment, and transport it in a proper safe manner, not use cheap plastic packaging, blah 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 blah. So yeah, that's the kind of slightly unpalatable thing that you kind of have to think, do I actually need that 40 quid table?
Well, I'm going to narrow down to your organisation, Interior Design Declares, and I'd like you to give an audience an idea of why your organisation is taking the stance it has and what sort of ambition you have for interior design.
Interior design declares is fundamentally about raising awareness of the need to work in a more sustainable way across lots of different categories. So energy, waste, sourcing materials, looking at biodiversity, as well as looking at emissions and our impact on the planet generally. We have loads and loads of resources. We have various different campaigns that we're supporting. And we are very good at talking to other similar lobbies in different industries. Well, both within the construction industry. There's a website called Built Environment Declares, which if you are a professional in construction, you can go and have a look at that and see if there is a declares for the industry you work in, such as there's a structural engineers declares, there's this big organisation of architects declares.
And so the reason why a lot of these organisations have come about, as I understand it, is that people are taking responsibility for actively declaring that there is a climate crisis. And so I wonder, with the organisation, obviously it's in the name, you declared that there is a crisis and you want to take some action against this. I mean, how much collaboration is there between the different organisations that you've talked about, and what sort of impact can that potentially have?
There is increasing cooperation and sharing of resources. There's the usual challenge about not working in silos, but also not disseminating information so widely that there's just you can't process the if we wrote to everybody that we're in touch with to say this is what we're doing this week, and they wrote to us in the same way, it would just be chaos. So there's a balance to be struck between getting the message out, but also making sure that we put the message out in a sort of comprehensible way, but but ensure that our voices collectively are heard, actually. And that's one of the things that, particularly from my point of view, with interior design declares, I'm really looking at to make sure that we speak to the other built environment declares bits of the umbrella, but also there's one called design declares, there's one called culture declares, there's business declares, which I'm very interested in at the moment. And then for example, in the banking industry, there is Bankers for Net Zero. There are various different commercial property pressure groups. I'm sure there are aviation, vehicle manufacturing, etc., pressure groups looking at.
There might be a long shot in the aviation industry, because I think
there's development of sustainable aviation fuel, supposedly.
Right.
I mean, again, I'm super skeptical about greenwashing there, but if you can get if people are going to stop flying, full stop. So if you can use fuel to power planes that is less harmful than the stuff that currently is used.
Is your feeling now that grassroots activism is slowly becoming more impactful than some legislative changes? And the reason I'm asking that is that I'm very lucky that I'm moving to a house, unless something happens like an earthquake. I'm moving to a house in the West Country, which is very close to an organisation called We Can Make, which you might be aware of. It works in South Bristol, and they are taking part. They're, pretty transformative organisation that have given the opportunity for the reuse of materials, but they're doing it on a phenomenal scale so that people can get access to these materials, get access to the goods, and then also access to the skills with which to reuse them inside their homes.
Yeah.
In your experience with all of the design that you've worked, I mean, how much of an impact can grassroots have? Do you think it's having a bigger impact than legislation?
I think it's having a huge impact. At the moment, probably, and there's loads of legislation that does different things, but at the moment, grassroots organisations are making more and quicker progress in the world of individual bits of sustainability, I think, than legislation, because legislation is, to my mind, legislation and research into the various what the legislation should say isn't given high enough priority by this government. Certainly wasn't by the last one, and absolutely needs to be. So it's kind of down to us to do ourselves. But also, also to lobby for government, local authorities, intergovernmental, EU, WHO, etc., to take steps on behalf of the sort of collective.
What sort of interior design specialist should take an interest in your organisation? What's the benefits, and what do you think they'll gain by joining your organisation?
Loads and loads and loads of information, loads and loads of resources. We've invented some of these wheels, so you don't have to. You can see what we've already done. You can also contribute massively because you're bound to have a skill or an interest or a niche that we don't already have. There's a real sense of community and a sense of you're working not like individually with a sort of little tiny voice in the background, but you're working with like-minded people. One of the people joined the organisation and said she felt like she'd found her tribe, which isn't necessarily a phrase I like, but I think that's it's quite apt for all these organisations, and it's heartening and it's encouraging to be working alongside people with similar kind of views and similar values and similar aims. And as we all know, by working with clever, interesting people, you spark ideas off each other and loads of stuff happens that you hadn't even thought was possible.
Yeah, I must admit, I kind of nerded out when I went on to looking at your resources. I like the idea that some of the practical and the creative can meld together. I also like the idea of finding out about things that I didn't know could happen. Like, could you recycle this? Could you reuse this? Or is this sustainable? Because there's a lot of questions which are difficult to answer. I'm going to ask you now then, what would be your recommendations for consumers? Final one then. What 3 things do you think people should be concentrating on if they're looking at their home to make it just a tiny, incy bit more sustainable as they're making design choices?
What materials the thing that you'll think about buying are made from. So it should be renewable or recycled, not recyclable, recycled already, and where and by whom the products are made and processed, shipped and sold.
I am going to put a list in the show notes of all the different resources that are available from Interior Design Declares. It's fantastic to get an idea of what sort of activism people can be part of and what sort of campaigns they could be doing. So I absolutely recommend that you go to that website if you're an interior designer and you have an idea that you want to be more sustainable in the work you're doing. I feel like there might be some more collaboration between us because I need help with these bulbs. I need help with fitting. So I think
bulbs is a super tricky one. I'm sure there's somebody out there that knows a lot about that.
So out there,
and please
get in contact,
get in touch, because the Interior Design Declares is an organisation that's with members who are designers but also suppliers to the interior design industry. And we've got lots of suppliers who are really key members and provide us with loads of information and really help to sort of lobby or direct lobbying in a direction from that point, from the manufacturing point of view.
So where on the internet can people go? What sort of resources will you provide on your website? Just name check them now then.
interiordesigndeclares.co.uk if you are a designer or in the interior design business industry. Look in particular at the resources page, but also news, events, and get involved. Join us if you can. If you're in built environment professional, look at builtenvironmentdeclares.co.uk to find out which of the specific sort of umbrella spoke organisations you can join. If you're a consumer, keep asking questions. There are lots and lots of campaigns, for example, like Nature Watch have got one currently, a petition about not using paint that's toxic, which is one of the other many strands you can think about, and about which there is loads and loads of information, loads of greenwashing, loads of options.
I absolutely recommend that you go and look at Interior Design Declare's website. Kat, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Lovely talking to you.
Speak again soon. Bye now.
Bye.